You have 24 hours to demolish that eyesore or we're calling the sheriff. That's what she screamed at me before I ever got the chance to explain, before she knew the secret that could shatter her entire world. It was only day 3 of building my dream cabin. Pine-scented air rolled through the valley, sunlight catching the fresh-cut lumber stacked neatly by my tools. This was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to prove to myself and maybe to my daughter Emma that I could still build something real after the wreckage of my divorce. Instead, Victoria Ashworth stormed onto my land like she was the queen of these mountains, clipboard in hand, designer clothes, perfume thick enough to choke a grizzly. The sound of her heels on the gravel felt like gunfire in the silence. Behind her, a slow parade of SUVs, neighbors craning their necks, judging me before I'd even spoken. She didn't introduce herself like a neighbor. She announced herself like an executioner. "This construction violates multiple community covenants," she declared, her voice dripping with the kind of superiority only people in power learn to fake. She listed off offenses like she was reading my criminal record. No permits, no architectural review, no environmental assessment. Then she shoved a cease and desist order into my hands, the paper still warm from her printer. I asked her one question. What community? I looked around. At endless wilderness, cliffs echoing with hawk cries, not a house in sight. Her answer was a legal document. Pine Valley Homeowners Association governs all residential properties in our jurisdiction. Your uncle signed these covenants 6 months ago. You inherited his obligations. That's when the first crack appeared in her perfect little performance. My uncle, Silas Brennan, had died 8 months ago. She was waving paperwork dated 2 months after he was in the ground. Victoria didn't care. She stepped closer, eyes sweeping over my worn work clothes, my beat-up truck, my calloused hands. And then she said something I'll never forget. This isn't the kind of neighborhood where people in your situation typically thrive. I'd hate for your daughter to be embarrassed by any unpleasantness. She'd done her homework. Divorce, financial struggles, custody of a teenage daughter. She wanted me to know she knew. "Are you threatening my family?" I asked. My voice was cold enough to freeze the sap in the pines. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Friendly advice. Some battles aren't worth fighting, especially when you're clearly outmatched." Then she turned, walked back to her pristine BMW and left me with a 48-hour countdown to tear down my dream. I watched her taillights vanish into the mountain road and thought about the last words Uncle Silas had ever spoken to me. Don't let anyone push you around. By morning, she was back. She hadn't even given me the 48 hours she'd threatened. This time she brought a lawyer, or at least the cheapest imitation of one I'd ever seen. Douglas Cranky. Coffee-stained tie, briefcase held together with duct tape, and an air of someone one bad day away from selling his suit for rent money. "You're being served," Victoria announced, her voice ringing with courtroom drama. Cranky handed me papers stating I owed $15,000 in retroactive violation penalties, and that I never received proper HOA disclosure documents during the property transfer, which supposedly voided my ownership claims. 15 grand. For building a cabin on my own land. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I simply said, "I'll review these with my attorney." Victoria laughed. "You can't afford an attorney, Mr. Brennan. Save yourself the embarrassment." The moment they were gone, I drove straight to the county courthouse. The place smelled like dust, old paper, and stale coffee. Betty, the clerk, had been there since before the county installed its first computer, and she helped me dig through property records. That's when I found it. The Pine Valley HOA had been formed exactly 6 months ago, 2 months after Uncle Silas died. The boundaries had been drawn like a sniper's sight right around my property. My 5 acres accounted for 60% of the HOA's land area. "Looks like someone drew those lines to trap your uncle's land," Betty whispered over the maps. I pulled more records. Every single HOA member was either related to Victoria or worked for her husband's construction company. This wasn't about community governance. It was organized crime with letterhead. Dead men can't sign contracts. And you can't be bound by agreements formed after you already own the land. I had them. I just needed the right weapon. I called Sarah Kim, a real estate attorney I knew from my divorce days. She was razor sharp, the kind of lawyer who could cut you in half with a well-timed question. Her office smelled like determination and strong coffee. "This is legally impossible," she said, flipping through the documents. "You cannot retroactively bind a dead person to covenants formed after their death. We're filing countersuits, harassment, false claims, emotional distress, and we're digging into how they even included your property in these boundaries." Victoria must have felt the ground shift because she escalated overnight. An emergency meeting. My neighbor Jake attended and later showed up on my porch with a six-pack, shaking his head. "She's telling everyone you're a dangerous drifter, criminal background, transient, total lies, but people believe it." Then the Facebook group appeared. Pine Valley Community Safety. My picture. Posts about protecting children from me. Comments calling me a predator. Her arrogance got the better of her. In trying to prove the HOA's financial strength, she posted their financial records. $847,000 collected from 12 houses in 6 months. No amenities, no projects. Just a black hole where the money should be. I knew it from my divorce. If there's no paper trail for where the money went, it went into someone's pocket. Sarah almost spit out her coffee when she saw the numbers. She just gave us a federal fraud case. By the next morning, a county inspector's truck pulled into my driveway. He handed me citations for building violations that didn't exist. "Sorry, buddy," he muttered. "Orders from the top. Someone's got serious pull at the county office." The metallic taste of corruption lingered in my mouth as I watched him drive away. Victoria had just crossed the line from harassment to government corruption, and she didn't realize it yet, but she'd just given me the nuclear option. Because when you bribe public officials to harass a private citizen, you don't just risk losing your case. You risk losing everything. I didn't have to wait long for her next move. At 3 in the morning, the sound of shattering glass yanked me out of sleep. Then came the sharp chemical burn of diesel fuel in my nose. I grabbed my flashlight and stumbled outside. My construction site looked like a war zone. Lumber scattered like giant pickup sticks. My generator tipped on its side, fuel spilling into the pine needles. Roofing nails glinted across my access road like deadly confetti. This wasn't about legal battles anymore. This was personal. By sunrise, I found my truck sitting on 4 flat tires and an email from the EPA claiming I was destroying sensitive wetlands. The so-called wetlands were a seasonal creek that had been trickling through this property since before Victoria was born. Around noon, the cars started showing up. Not blocking my driveway, that would be illegal, but parking. Just close enough to force me into ridiculous 3-point turns every time I tried to leave. When I confronted the drivers, they gave me the same line. Just exercising our right to park on a public road. Then came the fake safety signs. Official-looking warnings. Hazardous construction zone. Authorized personnel only. My contractor, Pete, called in a panic. "Marcus, I've got 3 clients asking if I'm licensed for hazardous waste cleanup. Word's spreading your site is contaminated." Victoria was turning my own community against me. She'd taken the best trick out of the con artist's handbook. Use your target's own resources as a weapon. But sabotage meant she was getting desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. Sarah and I spent the next day digging deeper at the courthouse. Betty, the clerk, slid over a stack of planning documents, her voice low. "You'll want to see this." 6 months ago, Mountain Vista Resorts had approached the county with plans for a $50 million luxury resort. And smack in the middle of their proposed location, My 5 acres. It wasn't just in Victoria's Way, it was the crown jewel. Spa views, golf course elevation, even a helicopter landing pad. The development agreement was clear. They couldn't break ground without acquiring all residential properties in the corridor. Betty pointed to a buried line item. $400,000. Community relations consulting. Sarah's eyes narrowed. That's not consulting. That's a bribe with a business card. Suddenly, every move Victoria had made perfect sense. She wasn't just trying to enforce HOA rules. She was trying to deliver my land to a developer before the clock ran out. Every day I resisted cost her hundreds of thousands in potential profit. That night, I put my electrician skills to work. Motion sensors, night vision, cameras. Enough security gear to make Fort Knox jealous. 2 nights later, I got my first show. Midnight. A pickup rolled down my access road with headlights off. The driver, hoodie pulled up, face half hidden, carried a gas can toward my lumber pile. My cameras caught the moment he turned toward the lens. It was Tommy Ashworth, Victoria's son. The next morning, I walked into the sheriff's office with USB drives in hand. Video evidence, license plate, clear as daylight. Victoria's concerned citizen narrative collapsed faster than Tommy's alibi under questioning. But I wasn't done. Public filings showed the HOA paying for security services from companies that didn't exist. Landscaping done by Victoria's brother-in-law in Florida, and legal research fees big enough to make a Supreme Court justice blush. She was bleeding the HOA dry while setting herself up for the resort payday. Still, I knew she wasn't just greedy, she was cornered. And cornered animals bite hardest before they go down. The bite came fast. I woke one morning to a process server handing me an emergency injunction. Victoria claimed I was building an illegal commercial facility and demanded the court force me to demolish everything. The paperwork accused me of planning a transient housing operation that would destroy the moral fabric of our community. She wanted $100,000 in damages and a restraining order banning me from my own land. By noon, 3 county inspectors swarmed my property: environmental compliance, building safety, septic evaluation, each writing citations for violations that didn't exist. The lead inspector, Rodriguez, muttered an apology under his breath. Orders from way above my pay grade. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. But that wasn't her cruelest blow. That afternoon, my ex-wife called. Her voice was tight with rage. "Marcus, what the hell is going on? Emma's friends are showing her Facebook posts saying you're a sex offender. She's locked in her room crying. She wants to know if her dad is a monster." My blood went cold. "What posts?" "A community safety group. Your photo. Warnings about registered predators targeting children." "Is it true?" "It's all fabricated," I said, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles went white. "Victoria's running a smear campaign to steal my land." "Well, fix it," Linda snapped. "Judges consider this kind of thing harmful to minors. It could affect custody." After she hung up, I sat in my uncle's old workshop, the air heavy with the smell of oil and cedar. This wasn't just about land anymore. She'd dragged my daughter into it. That night, Jake showed up again. 3 HOA families told me Victoria's threatening higher assessments if they don't sign statements against you. And the treasurer, Beth Morrison, she's been asking where all the money's going. Victoria's dodging audits. Beth had found invoices for companies that didn't exist, payments for work never done, and she was ready to talk. I called Sarah. "We can force an emergency audit and file criminal charges for the false sex offender accusations." But I wanted to hit her where it really hurt: her reputation. The next morning, I took screenshots of every lie she'd posted about me. Then I visited every business she and her family owned or frequented. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I simply laid the facts on the counter and asked managers if they wanted to be associated with that kind of defamation. By afternoon, even her own mother was calling her, demanding to know why the family was being frozen out by local businesses. The tide was turning. But desperate criminals don't go quietly. And I had no idea that tomorrow I'd uncover a secret my uncle had kept hidden for decades. A secret that would give me more power over Victoria Ashworth than she could ever imagine. The next morning, the storm finally broke. Not in the sky, but in the silence of my uncle's old workshop. I'd been pacing all night, trying to figure my next move. My hands itched for work, for something I could control. So I started cleaning, prying up warped floorboards to replace them. That's when my crowbar hit something solid. Not wood. The metallic clang echoed through the room like a bell announcing destiny. Under 4 decades of sawdust and oil stains, a steel lockbox waited. Military green. Combination dial worn smooth from use. I knew the code before I tried it. Uncle Silas's birthday, the day he bought this land. When the lock clicked open, the smell of old paper and secrets filled the air. Inside were manila folders as thick as bricks, corporate seals that glinted like they belonged in a bank vault, and a stack of deeds that made my hands shake. Right on top, an incorporation certificate. Brennan Holdings, LLC, March 15th, 1998. Sole proprietor, Silas J. Brennan. The next document made me sit down hard in his old chair. In 2010, during the housing crash, the original developer of Pine Valley went bankrupt. Everyone else ran from real estate like it was radioactive. Uncle Silas did the opposite. He bought up the defaulted mortgage debt, not the houses, the land underneath them. 47 homes, 12 of them part of Victoria's precious HOA. Every one of them built on land Silas owned through his holding company. The people living here had been paying their mortgages for over a decade, thinking they owned their land. But legally, they were tenants, and now, as sole heir, I was their landlord. That explained how a mountain hermit afforded his comfortable life, and why he'd always told me the land held secrets. But the real gut punch? Victoria's own house sat on my land. She was 3 months behind on rent. I could serve her with an eviction notice before the month was out. The bank records in the lockbox told the rest of the story. Rent payments quietly funneled to Brennan Holdings, property tax receipts, maintenance expenses for roads and utilities the HOA thought they controlled. Silas had been an invisible landlord for nearly 3 decades. The documents were airtight, notarized, stamped, matched perfectly to county records. I sat there for a long time, surrounded by the weight of it. With one phone call, I could wipe Victoria and her loyalists off this mountain. I could sell the development to Mountain Vista Resorts and walk away a millionaire. But Uncle Silas's voice whispered through the dust, "Don't let anyone push you around." He hadn't said push back harder, just don't let them. There was a difference. By the time I walked into Sarah's office, my decision wasn't made. But I knew one thing. This was no longer about defending myself. It was about deciding what kind of man I was going to be. She examined the corporate seal under her desk lamp, whistling low. "Marcus, this is bulletproof. Every filing is perfect. He even tracked payments for 27 years. Then she laid out my options like a general mapping a war. Plan A. Reveal ownership, dissolve the HOA, clean break. Plan B, selective enforcement, evict only the worst offenders. Plan C, full nuclear, expose everything to the media. Burn it down. I thought of Emma, of the neighbors who'd believed Victoria's lies, of the families who didn't deserve to lose their homes because of one power-hungry tyrant. What about Plan D? I asked. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Which is, expose the fraud, but offer them a way forward. Cut rents, offer them ownership. Turn this place into a real community instead of a fiefdom. Her expression shifted. the sharp grin of someone who'd just realized they were holding a royal flush. It's risky, but it's the one that makes you the hero. Over the next 2 days, we prepared. Legal documents in triplicate, copies, stored off-site, evidence sent to federal investigators specializing in HOA fraud. I called Beth Morrison, the treasurer Victoria had been dodging. We met at the diner, the smell of apple pie and burnt coffee wrapping us in a strange kind of safety. I've suspected something for months, Beth admitted. She's been collecting record-high fees, but no one knows where the money's going. I slid copies of fake invoices across the table, landscaping jobs never done, consulting fees to companies that didn't exist. Beth's hands trembled. She's been stealing from all of us. But Marcus, if we expose her, how do we protect the families who've sunk everything into these homes? That's when I knew Plan D was the right choice. Jake helped me test a high-grade audio system. When you drop this bombshell, he said, you want every word recorded, for legal reasons and for the history books. That night, I called Emma. Her voice was cautious at first, but I could hear hope creeping in as I explained the lies Victoria had told. So you're not dangerous? She asked softly. Not in the way she means, I said. And soon, everyone will know. I told her something I hoped she'd never forget. When people try to hurt you with lies, the best weapon isn't more lies. It's the truth, delivered at exactly the right time. Victoria didn't know it yet, but that time was coming. And she was about to learn that the land she'd been fighting to control had never been hers to begin with. Victoria must have sensed something shifting, because her next strike came from a direction I didn't expect. The courts. Tuesday morning, an emergency filing arrived at my door, a petition claiming I was mentally unstable, dangerous to the DAC community, and in need of immediate psychiatric evaluation. She'd convinced a judge, somehow, that I was a credible threat to my neighbors. The paperwork read like a cheap crime novel. I'd been obsessively surveilling residents, making graphic threats of arson, and exhibiting violent ideation. And she had witness statements from 3 HOA members who swore I'd approach them at night, ranting about conspiracies and promising to make everyone pay. Every word was a lie, but it looked terrifyingly official. By noon, Jake was on the phone. His voice was low and tight. Marcus, her brother-in-law is the county sheriff. He's planning to serve that mental health warrant with a full SWAT response. Claims you're armed and dangerous. I knew what that meant. In my electrician days, I'd heard too many stories about swatting and how quickly those could turn into tragedy. That night, Emma called. Her voice wasn't hurt this time. It was furious. Dad, they're saying you're a terrorist. Kids at school are showing me posts saying you're planning to shoot up the neighborhood. How can she just make this stuff up? I closed, my eyes gripping the phone like it was the only anchor I had. Because desperate people do desperate things, sweetheart. But sometimes they trip over their own lies. And sure enough, Sarah's investigator found the tripwire. The mental health petition had a psychological evaluation attached, signed by Dr. Richard Peaton, claiming he'd diagnosed me with antisocial personality disorder. Problem was, Dr. Peaton had been dead for 6 months. Sarah's paralegal pulled the death certificate herself. Victoria had forged the evaluation using stolen letterhead and a signature stamp. What had been a civil battle was now federal. Document forgery, punishable by years in prison. She's unraveling, Sarah said, flipping the forged papers with a kind of clinical disgust. And this kind of criminal overreach usually means one thing. She's running out of time to deliver your land to that resort. But Victoria wasn't finished. Thursday night, my motion-activated cameras lit up like daylight. Victoria herself creeping onto my property in the dead of night, gas can in one hand, road flares in the other. Her plan was almost laughable. Set a small fire near my lumber pile, then call it in as evidence that I was destroying the community. Instead, she stepped straight into a flood of light so bright it could have lit a stadium. 3 different cameras caught every angle as she froze like a guilty deer, clutching the gas can, her face twisted between shock and fury. Her scream cut through the mountains, echoing off the cliffs as she bolted back to her BMW. I watched the footage 3 times before calling Sarah. "We've got her, and tomorrow night, she's going to give us the stage to finish this." Because Friday night was the emergency community meeting Victoria herself had scheduled to address the threat of Marcus Brennan. She had no idea she was setting the table for her own execution. Friday morning started with a noise that didn't belong in the mountains, the thudding chop of helicopter rotors. When I stepped onto my porch, a dozen emergency vehicles were parked across my access road. Rifle scopes glinted in the sun, all pointed at my chest. News vans lined the shoulder like vultures waiting for a carcass. The sheriff's voice boomed through a megaphone. "Marcus Brennan, you are surrounded. Come out with your hands visible." Jake's voice came through my phone. "Don't move. She's told them you've planted explosives at the community center for tonight's meeting. She's got photos of you with suspicious packages and witnesses ready to testify." Suspicious packages? Bags of concrete mix for my cabin foundation. Witnesses? Probably the same 3 who swore I was prowling at night. Sheriff Davidson approached, looking more apologetic than hostile. "Marcus, I know this sounds bad, but the feds are breathing down our necks. Let us search so we can clear you." "Gladly," I said, handing him a USB drive. "But maybe watch this first." It was the footage from the night before, Victoria, in full HD, caught trying to set my property on fire. The sheriff's face went pale as the cameras caught her every move. "Well," he muttered, "that's going to complicate her story." While the bomb squad spent hours confirming that concrete mix was, in fact, concrete mix, Sarah filed emergency motions for Victoria's arrest. False police reports, attempted arson, and a terrorist hoax. By the afternoon, the news crews that had come for the mountain standoff were eating a different story. HOA president under federal investigation for fraud, forgery, and false terror reports. Victoria, of course, went straight for the cameras. Perfect makeup, perfect tears. Painting herself as the heroic protector of a peaceful neighborhood under siege. She told reporters she just wanted safety, just wanted her community back. But Channel 7's Mariah Santos had done her homework. "Live on air," she asked the one question Victoria couldn't answer. "Mrs. Ashworth, where is the $847,000 in special assessments your HOA has collected this year? Your filings show only $23,000 spent on legal fees. Where's the rest?" 3 seconds of silence on live TV feels like an eternity. Victoria's smile twitched, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. "That's confidential community business." By nightfall, the story had flipped, and the stage for the meeting was set. Tomorrow, in a room full of her supporters, cameras rolling, Victoria Ashworth was going to learn the one truth she'd spent months trying to bury. This was never her land, to begin with. The Pine Valley Community Center had never seen a crowd like this. 89 people crammed into a space built for 60. Folding chairs squealed against the worn linoleum as latecomers wedged themselves into corners. The air was thick, nervous, sweat mixing with old coffee, and that faint, dusty smell of a building that had hosted more bake sales than showdowns. News cameras lined the walls. County officials filled the front row, notepads ready, and at the podium, like a general before. Battle stood Victoria Ashworth. Sharp business suit, perfect makeup, voice carrying the polished authority of someone used to being obeyed. Her PowerPoint flashed onto the pull-down screen. Protecting our community, the Marcus Brennan threat assessment. She began with pictures. My cabin, my truck, my tools, twisted into something dangerous by the captions she'd crafted. Then came screenshots from my social media, Photos of my electrical work, framed as suspicious activity. Charts showing property values in danger from transient residents. This individual owes our community $97,000 in accumulated fines and legal fees, she said, her voice rising with righteous indignation. He has threatened families, intimidated children, and was investigated just yesterday for terrorist activities. The murmurs from the crowd had the rhythm of fear. These were good people, many of them. But they'd been fed her lies for months, and then she said it. The thing she should never have admitted out loud. Furthermore, she continued, clicking to a new slide, Mr. Brennan's continued presence jeopardizes a major economic development opportunity for Pine Valley. Mountain Vista Resorts has offered us partnership in a $50 million project that will create jobs and increase property values. I felt the shift in the room. A few heads turned. She'd just revealed, in front of 3 cameras and half the county, exactly why she'd been coming after me. Victoria called for victim impact statements, and 3 rehearsed neighbors stepped forward with tearful tales of feeling unsafe in their own homes. When she asked, "Does anyone else have concerns about this dangerous individual?" I stood. The crowd quieted. I could feel her eyes on me. The flicker of panic she tried to hide behind a politician's smile. "You're not a member of this community," she said quickly. "You have no right to speak here." "Actually, Victoria," I said, my voice calm enough to carry without shouting, "I have more right than anyone in this room." I walked toward the front, my leather folder under one arm. "My name is Marcus Brennan, and I am the sole owner of Brennan Holdings, LLC. I opened the folder and held up the incorporation papers so the cameras could see. "Which means I am the legal landlord of every single house in this subdivision." The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the hum of the old fluorescent lights. Then the room erupted. Gasps, shouts, chairs scraping as people turned to look at neighbors they'd never realized were tenants. Victoria lunged toward me, her voice cracking. "That's impossible! We own these homes!" "You own the buildings," I said, laying the property deeds across the podium like cards in a winning hand. "The land under them belongs to me, has for 27 years. Every mortgage payment you thought went to the bank. It was rent, forwarded to Brennan Holdings. And every HOA fee you collected, Victoria, you were stealing from people for managing property you don't own." Sheriff Davidson stepped forward. "Mrs. Ashworth, is that true?" Her face was white now, lips pulled thin. "You can't just—" "Actually," I interrupted, pulling out one last document, "you're 3 months behind on your own rent, which means I have legal grounds to evict you in 30 days. The room exploded again, this time with outrage aimed at her. She grabbed at my papers, shouting about property rights, until Davidson put a steadying hand on her shoulder. I raised my voice above the chaos. "I'm not here for revenge. Those of you who took part in the harassment, you have 30 days to find new housing. Everyone else? Your rent is cut in half starting today. And for those who want to own your land outright, I'll sell at C, cost, 0 interest." The cameras caught the moment federal agents walked in to place Victoria under arrest. Wire fraud, forgery, false terror reports. Her final scream echoed off the walls. "You can't do this to me. I am this community." But the truth is, communities aren't built on lies. They're built on trust. 3 months later, the view from my porch didn't look like a battlefield anymore. The same stretch of meadow where Victoria's patrol cars used to idle was now filled with neighborhood kids chasing a frisbee. Laughter carried over the creek, and the air smelled of barbecue from Jake's backyard. Emma arrived for her weekend visit with a smile that could have lit the whole valley. "Dad, I got into Colorado State. Full scholarship." She threw her arms around me, the scent of her mother's shampoo and pure teenage hope hitting me harder than I expected. "What did you write your essay about?" I asked. She grinned. "How my dad taught me that real strength isn't about getting revenge. It's about building something better from the ashes of corruption." I'd have been lying if I said my throat didn't tighten. Victoria Ashworth was serving 18 months in federal prison, ordered to pay $150,000 in restitution to the families she'd defrauded. 6 of her most loyal enforcers had quietly left the valley, their leases terminated, their actions documented for anyone who might ever ask why. The rest of the neighborhood? They surprised me. The same people who once avoided me at the hardware store now brought me casseroles, borrowed my tools, and invited me to backyard potlucks. Fear dissolves fast when the source of it disappears. Sarah, who had started this, as my attorney, was now more than that. We'd been through a war together, the kind where you win not because you burn your enemies down, but because you outlast them without losing yourself. The transformation was more than social. Cutting rents in half gave families breathing room they hadn't felt in years. Instead of scraping by under Victoria's endless special assessments, they were fixing up their homes, putting money into their kids' college funds, starting savings accounts. Mrs. Peterson, once fined for having non-compliant flowers, turned her backyard into a full community garden. Now she handed out tomatoes instead of HOA warnings. The kids who used to give me wary glances now showed up on my porch, asking for help with science projects, curious about the electrician who beat the bad guys. The biggest change? The Silas, Brennan Community Justice Fund. We built it from the money recovered from Victoria's fraud, and it provided free legal aid to families fighting corrupt HOAs across 3 states. In just a few months, we'd exposed similar schemes in 17 other communities. Sarah brought me the latest call just last week. Family in Oregon, she said, scrolling through her phone. City council's trying to condemn their family farm for an Amazon warehouse. Exact same tactics Victoria used. They want to know if you'll help. Emma's eyes lit with that same determination I'd felt when I first stood up to Victoria. We're going to help them, right? I smiled. We're going to try. I had the means now, not just financially, but strategically. The holding company gave me leverage most people never get against corrupt systems. But Uncle Silas's lesson stayed with me. Power is only worth something if you use it to protect, not just to punish. Financially, the resolution had been healing for the whole valley. I gave residents the option to buy their land at cost, with zero-interest financing through the Justice Fund. Many took it. Some chose to keep renting, and I honored that choice. No pressure, no penalties. The development rights Victoria had promised to Mountain Vista Resorts, I donated them to the Colorado Conservation Trust. The wilderness would stay wild for Emma's children and their children after that. And here's the thing. Property values actually went up. Turns out, people will pay a premium to live in. A place where neighbors help each other instead of harassing them over fence heights and mailbox colors. As twilight settled over the mountains that evening, I leaned back in my chair, listening to the mingling sounds of conversation and creek water. Uncle Silas had kept his secret for decades, waiting for the right moment and the right person to use it. Now I understood why. Some power in the wrong hands destroys. In the right hands, it rebuilds. I was still thinking about that when Sarah handed me a thick envelope. From that Oregon family, she said. I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter asking if the guy who destroyed an entire corrupt HOA could help them save their century-old farm from corporate greed. Emma looked up from her college brochures. Well, ready to take on City Hall next? Her grin was pure mischief and fierce pride. Let's do it, I said, but this time you're helping with the legal research. The mountains were dark now, but the porch light spilled a warm glow over us. Children's laughter echoed across the valley where once there had been only threats and fear. And I realized something. The sweetest victories aren't the ones where your enemies lose. They're the ones where your community wins. I never planned on becoming the guy who fights corrupt HOAs for a living. But word travels fast. Faster than wildfire when it's about someone who actually beat the system. The Silas Brennan Community Justice Fund had started as a way to close the book on Pine Valley. Now it was my full-time fight. The calls came in from everywhere. Gated communities in Arizona, beach condos in Florida, suburban cul-de-sacs in Illinois. Different zip codes, same playbook. Power-hungry board members, fraudulent fees, threats to families who couldn't afford a fight. Some cases were small, a retired couple fined into bankruptcy over the wrong shade of driveway paint. Others were big enough to make my Pine Valley war look like a schoolyard spat. A Texas neighborhood where the HOA president was secretly funneling assessments into offshore accounts while partnering with a developer to bulldoze a wildlife preserve. Every time I saw echoes of Victoria, the arrogance, the greed, the belief that ordinary people wouldn't have the resources or the courage to push back. Emma started helping me sort through the letters and emails after school. I'd come home to find her sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by stacks of envelopes, a yellow legal pad in front of her. "This one's bad," she'd say, sliding a folder across to me. "Family in Nevada. HOA's trying to foreclose on them because their adult son moved back home after losing his job. Supposedly violates single occupancy rules." I'd glance at her notes. Meticulous, color-coded, every lie underlined. She had her mother's organization, my stubbornness, and a fire in her eyes that made me think maybe she'd found her calling. Sarah stayed busy too. She'd streamlined our process, turning my war with Victoria into a blueprint we could apply anywhere. Public records requests, forensic accounting, targeted media pressure, and, when necessary, the nuclear option of federal complaints. We didn't win every battle. Some communities were too fractured, too afraid to stand up. Sometimes, the corruption went so deep we couldn't dig it out without tearing the whole place apart. But even then, we left them with tools, information, contacts, the courage to keep fighting. And when we did win, you could feel it in the air. The same shift I'd felt in Pine Valley after Victoria's arrest. Neighbors talking to each other. Again. Kids playing outside without parents peeking nervously through blinds. Barbecue smoke replacing the stink of fear. One afternoon, Emma came into the workshop holding her phone like it was evidence. "Dad, someone made a video about you. It was a homeowner in Oregon. The family we'd helped save their farm from being condemned for that Amazon warehouse." The video wasn't flashy. Just them, standing in front of their century-old barn, saying thank you. At the end, the father looked straight into the camera. "If you're watching this and you think you can't win, you're wrong. You just need someone who knows the game better than they do." I didn't realize I was smiling until Emma said, "See? You're kind of a big deal now." I shook my head. "I'm not the story. The people are. We just hand them the right tools." Still, I knew the truth. There was a power in these victories that went beyond property lines. When you take back your home, you take back a piece of yourself. Pine Valley kept thriving. The Justice Fund's zero-interest buyout program had turned renters into true owners. The community garden was so successful that Mrs. Peterson had to add a second plot. Even Jake, who once thought keeping his head down was the safest bet, now ran a monthly neighborhood watch meeting, the kind built on cooperation, not control. And then came the letter from Denver. A mid-size HOA in the city had reached out. Their board president accused of siphoning off over $1 million in funds while threatening residents with foreclosures. It was a bigger stage, a bigger fight, and a bigger enemy. The kind who didn't just have friends in the county courthouse, but in the state capitol. Sarah spread the file across my workbench, the familiar scent of coffee and determination in the air. "If we take this one, Marcus, we'll be up against political donors, lobbyists, and a PR machine that makes Victoria look like an amateur." I looked at the numbers. The fraud was blatant. Shell companies, no-bid contracts to relatives, emergency repairs billed 3 times over. The difference was, this board knew how to cover its tracks. Emma leaned over the table. We can do it. We've done harder. She didn't know it yet, but she was right. I thought about Uncle Silas, how he'd built Brennan Holdings quietly, waiting for the right moment to use it. He hadn't gone looking for fights. He'd just been ready when one came to his doorstep. Maybe that was my life now. Not chasing battles, but never backing down when they found me. I looked up at Sarah, then at Emma. Let's take it. But we do it our way. No collateral damage to the families who've been lied to. We go after the ones holding the knife, not the ones bleeding from it. Sarah smiled. Plan D again. Plan D. The one that didn't just burn the rot out, but planted something better in its place. The Denver fight was going to be ugly. It would take months, maybe a year. But Pine Valley had taught me that the size of the enemy doesn't matter as much as the strength of the ground you're standing on, and I had the deed to my ground, literally. The Denver case took 11 months. 11 months of sifting through bank statements, chasing paper trails through 3 shell companies, and watching politicians squirm when the subpoenas started landing on their desks. There were nights I sat at the kitchen table, staring at spreadsheets until the numbers blurred, wondering if maybe this was the fight I couldn't win. But every time I thought about slowing down, I remembered the look on Emma's face the day she asked if I was really dangerous. The way lies had almost stolen her trust. That's what kept me in it. Not just the property rights, not just the fraud. The truth. And in the end, the truth broke through. The Denver board president resigned in disgrace, 2 members were indicted, and $1 million in misused funds was ordered returned to the residents. The HOA was dissolved. The community voted in a cooperative ownership model, the same one we'd built in Pine Valley. The day the news broke, Emma brought me a cupcake with Yeri 8 scrawled in frosting. What's the 8 for? I asked. She grinned. 8 wins. Oregon, Nevada, Texas, Florida, Illinois, Arizona, Denver, and Pine Valley. You've taken down 8 HOAs in 2 years. That's a thing now. I laughed, but I knew it wasn't about the number. It was about the people behind each one. The retirees who kept their home, the kids who didn't have to change schools because of some trumped-up violation, the neighbors who learned to talk to each other again instead of through lawyers. Pine Valley had changed too. The Silas Brennan Community Justice Fund was thriving, handling more cases than I ever could alone. We'd trained volunteers in 3 states on how to pull public records, identify fraudulent filings, and navigate the slow grind of court without losing heart. Sarah had become my partner in every sense of the word. She was still razor sharp, in a courtroom. But she'd learned to savor the quiet victories too. The ones without headlines. One evening, we sat on the porch watching the sunset burn gold over the peaks. Jake was tending the grill in the yard next door. Mrs. Peterson's garden was overflowing with zucchini she'd try to give away later. And Emma was flipping through her first semester course schedule for Colorado State. You ever think about selling? Sarah asked quietly. I knew what she meant. The land, the houses, the holding company. I could cash out tomorrow and never work another day in my life. But I shook my head. Uncle Silas didn't keep this place for money. He kept it because it meant something. If I sold it, I'd just be another guy who saw land as a payday. She smiled. Good. I like this view. We fell into an easy silence, the kind that only comes when the people around you are safe and you've got nothing left to prove for the day. Emma broke it a few minutes later. You know, Dad, what you're doing now, it's bigger than HOA fights? I raised an eyebrow. Oh? It's about people who think they're too small to fight back. You show them they're not. I let that sit for a moment. She was right. The HOAs were just the surface. Underneath was a pattern as old as greed itself. People in power convincing everyone else that resistance was impossible, and sometimes all it took was one person to prove them wrong. The next morning, another envelope arrived. No return address, just my name written in careful block letters. Inside was a photo of a modest farmhouse in Kansas, a family standing in front holding a sign, "Help us fight back." I set it on the table between Sarah and Emma. Emma's grin was instant. Number 9? I looked out at the mountains, the same peaks my uncle had called home for decades, and felt the weight of his last words again. Don't let anyone push you around. Number 9, I said. We didn't know yet what kind of fight it would be. But I knew this. The people on that porch in Kansas didn't just need a lawyer. They needed someone who'd been in the trenches, who understood that winning wasn't about crushing the other side. It was about building something stronger in the space their corruption used to fill. And maybe that was my job now. Not just to fight, but to teach others how to fight for themselves. As we started sketching out our first steps, I could hear the sound of kids playing in the distance, the echo of voices across the valley. That used to be the sound of a battlefield. Now, it was the sound of victory. So if you're watching this and you've got your own HOA horror story, you're not alone. Whether it's a neighbor with too much power or a board that thinks the rules only apply when it benefits them, there's always a way forward. Sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's slow. But the truth has a way of finding daylight. Drop your story in the comments. Someone else might read it and realize they're not crazy, not helpless, not outnumbered, and who knows? Maybe your fight will be number 10, because the battle against corruption doesn't end when the paperwork's signed. It ends when the people who were scared start smiling again, and I plan to keep chasing that smile for as long as I can.